Think Lauren Sánchez just stumbled into the arms of the richest man alive. Think again, because when you trace her journey from ambitious journalist to helicopter pilot to wife of Jeff Bezos, you begin to see something far more deliberate and far more complex than luck. It is a story of a woman who turned 3 children from 3 different fathers into the foundation of a future dynasty. And it is a story that begins long before the headlines about Venice weddings and billionaire yachts. Picture the scene: Venice, Italy, August, sunlight dancing across the canals. Lauren Sánchez in her mid-50s, walking down the aisle, her gown shimmering, her 2 sons flanking her as though guardians of a new chapter. The cameras clicked the whispers, followed the headlines shouted about Bezos and his glamorous bride. But almost nobody stopped to ask about the children beside her, each of them carrying their own history. Each of them a piece of a puzzle she had spent more than 2 decades assembling. To understand the significance, you have to rewind to February 2001, when Lauren, then 31, gave birth to her first son, Nico, with Tony Gonzalez. One of the NFL's most famous tight ends at that time, Lauren was a rising television journalist hungry. For the spotlight, Tony was a Kansas City Chiefs star cashing multi-million-dollar contracts. They looked like the kind of power couple destined for Sports Illustrated covers and glossy red carpet appearances. But only a year later, it ended without fireworks, without tabloid meltdowns. Tony later hinted that real life was harder than childhood dreams of family, that marriage and kids are complicated. Lauren took that moment, which could have turned into scandal, and transformed it into a masterclass. In co-parenting for 5 years, she worked carefully, tirelessly, patiently to shape a new kind of family dynamic, and by her own account, it eventually exceeded all expectations. Today, Nico not only calls himself the luckiest boy in the world, but also lives as proof of how carefully his mother constructed bridges instead of walls. Lauren maintained close ties with Tony and with his wife Toby. So close, in fact, that they now vacation together, celebrate Thanksgiving together, even sat together. At Lauren's wedding with Bezos, it is a picture of modern family unity. But behind that picture were years of negotiation, compromise, emotional intelligence, and yes, strategy. Fast forward to 2024, Nico has grown into a 23-year-old stepping onto the Dolce & Gabbana runway during Milan Fashion Week, and who sat in the front row none other than Jeff Bezos and Lauren themselves, applauding every step. Coincidence hardly, when your mother is not just a journalist, but the partner of one of the most powerful men on the planet. Doors do not just open, they swing wide, and Nico, with his political science degree from the University of Colorado Boulder, suddenly stood on the edge of a life where modeling, fashion, and even space technology were within reach. That same year, his social media showed a simple message: congrats to the Blue Origin team. When the rocket launched, it was short, it was understated, but it was also symbolic. Nico was no longer just the son of a journalist. He was already being woven into the larger tapestry of Bezos' space empire. But while Nico represented the bright, polished side of co-parenting success, the story of Lauren's second child, Evan, revealed an entirely different lesson: the art of protection. The art of shielding innocence from the glare of scandal. Evan was born in June 2006 during Lauren's marriage to Patrick Whitesell, one of the most powerful Hollywood agents. A man whose roster included Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Hugh Jackman, names that. Could command millions with a single film contract. For young Evan, childhood meant Oscar nominees at dinner parties, luxury vacations at top resorts, and a life steeped in Hollywood privilege. But then came 2019, when Evan was only 13 and the world discovered intimate details of his mother's affair with Jeff Bezos, thanks to a tabloid expose in the National Enquirer. Imagine being that age, walking into school, knowing that your mother's personal texts were being dissected on television, screens across America. Lauren did what only the savviest mothers could do. She vanished him from the public eye. No more smiling photos on Instagram, no more family candids with visible faces. When she did post images, his head was turned, his face hidden. It was not an accident, it was a strategy. And when the divorce from Whitesell came, it was as swift as it was silent. Within 6 months, it was resolved. The prenup signed back in 2005 dictated property divisions and custody arrangements. There were no bitter court battles, no screaming headlines, no Hollywood spectacle. It ended with the kind of efficiency that suggested planning strategy and most of all determination to protect the children from becoming weapons in a war they never chose. Today, Evan, 18, studies business at the University of Miami, tuition alone $60,000 a year. Lauren posted about the heartbreak of letting her son go after years of late-night snacks, early mornings, family dinners, but behind the sentimental caption lay the quiet question: who pays for all this? Perhaps it no longer matters. Because the deeper story was about Evan's new passion: aviation. Like his mother, he has taken to the skies learning to fly helicopters. Lauren shared a video of his first solo flight, calling it a special kind of trust to watch your child take off on their own. But for those watching closely, the symbolism was clear. The son had chosen the very path that once connected his mother to Jeff Bezos himself. Aviation had always been Lauren's bridge into another world. And then there is Ella, the youngest, born in January 2008, the most mysterious of all at 17. She is already a contradiction. On one hand, fiercely private, avoiding cameras, avoiding the curated spotlight. On the other hand, bold enough to walk her own path when asked to be maid of honor at her mother's Venice wedding. She refused the expected gown and chose instead a Dolce & Gabbana suit. Lauren proudly told Vogue how her daughter loved the fitting, how she would look. Amazing, but behind those words was something bigger. Ella was making a statement. She was not just another accessory to a glamorous wedding. She was her own person with her own identity. Ella rarely appears online, and when Lauren posts her images, her face is often obscured. It is a shield of privacy that feels deliberate. At 16, she received only one public message from her mother, a throwback photo, a short caption, nothing more. In a world where celebrity, children chase fame, Ella has chosen silence, privacy, independence. And yet what makes Lauren's approach truly extraordinary is not the individual stories, but the way she bound them together as one team. She often jokes that they are like the Brady Bunch, especially with Jeff's 4 children from his previous marriage. But the truth is far more strategic. She created a blended family where loyalty does not fracture between fathers, where step-siblings walk together rather than compete. When she married Bezos, Nico and Evan walked her down the aisle. Ella stood proudly as maid of honor. Tony Gonzalez and his wife sat among guests. Patrick Whitesell accepted the arrangement. This was not coincidence. This was the result of 20 years of careful maneuvering, because, make no mistake, what could have been seen as baggage, 3 children from 3 men, became instead her greatest proof of value to Jeff Bezos. Think of it this way: billionaires are not just looking for beauty, they are looking for stability, discretion, loyalty. Lauren demonstrated all of it. Nico moved seamlessly between fashion, football, and space. Evan pursued aviation and business while staying shielded from scandal. Ella chose independence, privacy, quiet strength. These were not accidents. They were outcomes of choices. And here lies the deeper question: was this maternal instinct, or was it strategy? When Jeff Bezos looked at Lauren, he did not see complication, he saw capability. He saw a woman who could manage high-profile exes, children, careers, scandals, and still keep harmony. It is no wonder that the richest man alive chose her to stand by his side. To understand Lauren Sánchez, you have to accept one truth. Nothing in her life ever simply happened. Everything was shaped, adjusted, managed with precision. She was never just a bystander in her own story. She was the director behind the curtain, moving the spotlight where she wanted it to shine. And this becomes clearest when you look at how she handled the men in her life. Because most people believe divorces bring chaos, bitterness, endless headlines, but Lauren turned them into stepping stones. Each relationship, each ending folded neatly into the next, leaving her reputation not damaged but strangely polished. Take Tony Gonzalez, the NFL legend who fathered her first child in another world that could have ended badly: single motherhood. Football fame, jealous spouses, tabloids waiting to pounce. But Lauren instead invested 5 years to ensure peace-building trust with Tony, building friendship with his wife Toby, until eventually the 3 of them operated as if they were a chosen family. When Nico graduated from college, when he walked the runway, when he cheered the Blue Origin launch, Both his parents and his step-family were all there together. No bitterness, no resentment. That kind of harmony does not just happen, it is crafted. Then came Patrick Whitesell, Hollywood agent powerhouse, one of those names that sits behind the biggest careers in film. A man with influence that stretches from red carpets to boardrooms. Their marriage could have become a nightmare after. The scandal with Bezos exploded. The National Enquirer had already published intimate texts. The world was already whispering. Yet the divorce papers were signed, the prenup enforced custody, decided property divided, and all of it happened so quickly. And so quietly that Hollywood barely had time to gossip. This was not luck. This was strategy, and most of all, diplomacy. Think about it. Patrick could have gone to war. He could have dragged her through the mud-exposed details that tabloids would have paid millions for, but instead, he chose silence. Why? Because Lauren had already spent years positioning herself as a partner, not an enemy, someone who could co-parent without drama, someone who would never cut him out of the children's lives. She neutralized conflict before it could ignite. And that is what kept her image intact, while she stood hand in hand with Jeff Bezos in Venice years later. And now Jeff himself, the most powerful man in the room, the billionaire who can afford anything. From rockets to Renaissance art, even he could not ignore the way Lauren managed her past. When he looked at her, he did not see scandal. He saw a woman who could navigate ex-partners, family loyalties, social pressures, and keep every piece in balance. He saw not a liability, but an asset. And there is another layer: financial. When you examine the lives of her 3 children, you begin to notice a shift in scale. Nico's education at Colorado Boulder, $55,000 a year. Evan's tuition. At Miami, $60,000 a year. Ella's private school in Los Angeles, $40,000 a year. Then add the modeling, the flight training, the art workshops. These are not hobbies funded on a television journalist's salary. These are opportunities, opened by proximity to Bezos' wealth. And yet notice how Lauren plays this delicate game. She never frames it as Jeff taking over. She frames it as shared parenting, as collective effort, so that neither Tony nor Patrick feels erased by the billionaire's shadow. This is where Lauren's brilliance shines, because money could have created resentment, but instead, it became part of a larger family strategy. She allowed her former partners to maintain dignity, to maintain relevance. Even while Jeff's billions quietly financed a lifestyle none of them could rival, and then consider the children themselves, each adapting in their own way. Nico crafting a public persona, careful, curated, not loud, not reckless, just polished enough to look independent, but never straying too far from family ties. Evan choosing near invisibility, letting privacy protect him, building skills in business and aviation that seem almost designed to slot neatly into Bezos' empire. Ella walking the thin line between rebellion and compliance, asserting identity through clothing choices, refusing unnecessary attention, yet standing as maid of honor when duty called each child, revealing not randomness, but subtle guidance from a mother who had already mapped their futures. This is where the suspense builds, because behind every smile, every yacht vacation, every social media caption is a question: how much of this is maternal instinct, and how much is chessboard strategy? When Lauren said, "We are like the Brady Bunch," she made it sound like a joke, but it was not a joke. It was a blueprint. She was building a blended family dynasty where children from 3 fathers and 4 more from Jeff's side could stand together, not divided by loyalty, but united by opportunity. And this unity was on full display at the Venice wedding. Nico and Evan walking her down the aisle, Ella standing as maid of honor, Tony Gonzalez smiling from the guest seats, Patrick absent from the gossip columns, and Jeff accepting not just Lauren, but the entire constellation of her past. This was not a wedding. It was a coronation, a moment where decades of maneuvering culminated in one symbolic gesture, the merging of families into something far larger, yet for all the glamour and harmony, there are shadows, questions lingering beneath the surface. What did the children truly feel when their private lives became front-page news? How did it shape Nico's identity to go from being a football star's son to the stepson of the world's richest man? How did Evan handle the weight of scandal exploding in his teenage years when the internet dissected his mother's every move? How did Ella learn to value privacy in a world where other celebrity teens chase followers and fame did? They ever question whether their lives were being shaped for them rather than by them? And this is where the story sharpens, because while Lauren has proven herself as strategist, protector, and unifier, every strategy carries a cost, every choice leaves echoes, and those echoes will follow her children into adulthood, into careers, into relationships, into every room where the Bezos name opens doors, but also raises expectations. The truth is, no matter how carefully a parent shields no child escapes untouched by scandal, when the National Enquirer splashed Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez across the front pages, in 2019 it was not just adults watching, it was teenagers, classmates, teachers, strangers online. Suddenly, Nico, Evan, and Ella were not simply children. They were side characters in a global headline. And that is a burden. Few can imagine, Nico was already entering adulthood when the scandal broke. He was in college balancing studies and social life when suddenly his mother's name was linked to the richest man in the world. He could have crumbled under the weight of whispers. He could have turned bitter or rebellious. But instead he leaned into opportunity modeling. At Dolce & Gabbana, graduating with a degree that could open political or business doors, cheering on Blue Origin launches. Each movie deliberate. Each move aligning him closer to a narrative of independence, yet always linked to the Bezos orbit. For Evan, the timing was harsher. 13 years old, the age when identity is fragile, when peers can be cruel, when whispers in the hallway cut deeper than headlines on a screen. Suddenly his mother's texts were national jokes, his family divorce, material for late-night hosts most children would have hidden in shame. Yet Lauren moved fast. She pulled him from the spotlight, scrubbed his image from feeds, posted only glimpses with faces turned away. She created a bubble around him. But a bubble cannot erase the memory of watching classmates laugh at your family's story. It cannot erase the knowledge that your home life is open for public consumption. And then Ella, the youngest, at just 11, she was old enough to sense the tension, but young enough to live in the shadows of her brothers. Lauren shielded her even more than Evan photos blurred. Captions, vague public presence nearly erased in a world where fame is currency. Ella was taught silence was power. Her refusal to chase attention may not be teenage rebellion at all, but a survival mechanism, a learned response to a world that proved cruel the moment her family name hit headlines. This is the paradox: the children inherited opportunity, unimaginable wealth, connections, education, careers, but also expectations, scrutiny, pressure to succeed, pressure to behave, pressure to prove worthy of being part of the Bezos dynasty. And the irony is that their mother's strategy, which protected them, also bound them tightly to a future. Scripted long before they reached adulthood. Look closely at their choices, and you see patterns. Nico stepping onto a runway in Milan. Not just fashion, but symbolism. A stage where power and influence mingle, where family presence in the front row mattered more than the clothes Evan flying helicopters. Not just hobby, but echo of his mother's path. The very skill that connected her to Bezos and into aviation. The very field where Bezos builds his empire. Ella choosing privacy, not just teenage moodiness, but a calculated positioning as the one who holds back, the one who saves her presence for moments of gravity, like standing as maid of honor in Venice. And so the suspense grows, because what appears on the surface as coincidence looks increasingly like a carefully woven plan, each child not forced but guided, nudged, shaped into roles that fit a larger vision of what a blended Bezos-Sánchez family could represent to the world. Yet this raises haunting questions. Identity crisis waits at the edges for each of them. Nico must wonder, am I successful because of my own talent or because of the doors my stepfather opens? Evan must wonder, am I pursuing aviation for myself or because it ties me to the story that linked my parents to Jeff? Ella must wonder, will I always be known as the daughter who chose silence instead of fame? And deeper still, will any of them ever escape the shadow of being steps to Jeff? Bezos, will they ever truly be themselves or forever ambassadors of a dynasty they did not ask to inherit? The brilliance of Lauren's strategy is undeniable, but so is its cost, because strategy built on control always leaves one unpredictable element: emotion, and when children grow, when they claim independence, when they begin to question the script laid before them, that is when cracks appear. Already we see glimpses Nico balancing visibility with restraint, careful but clearly aware of public gaze. Evan leaning into business, perhaps drawn to independence. From headlines by building skills that make him valuable in his own right. Ella rejecting gowns for suits, rejecting attention for privacy choices that scream subtle rebellion beneath outward compliance. Each choice hinting that while Lauren built the framework, the children themselves are beginning to test its walls. And what happens when they push harder? When wealth and legacy demand conformity, but individuality demands freedom. What happens when the dynasty Jeff Bezos imagined collides with the human complexity of three young adults shaped by scandal, shielded by strategy, and yet still craving authenticity? This is where the real suspense lies. Not in the wedding, not in the tabloids, not in the billions, but in the quiet unfolding of the next chapter. Because wealth can buy education, careers, even reputations, but it cannot buy identity, and it cannot buy peace inside a heart that wonders if it is truly free. When Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez walked hand in hand through Venice. For their wedding, it was not just two adults pledging vows, it was the culmination of 2 decades of choices. A timeline where every father, every child, every sacrifice had been woven together into something larger than a marriage. This was a coronation, the official merging of lives that had already been stitched together long before the aisle. Because the truth is, wealth does not only magnify dreams, it magnifies fractures. Michael Sánchez's lawsuit, the leaking of texts, the battle over private images, it was never just a brother versus a billionaire. It was a reminder that in families built on ambition, betrayal can cut closer than enemies ever could. And while Bezos and Lauren smiled for photographers, they knew the storm behind them was not just scandal, but bloodline. Look at the fathers. Patrick Whitesell, one of Hollywood's most powerful agents. Michael, who played his role as father in the early years. And Tony Gonzalez, NFL legend, each could have been an obstacle. Each could have demanded control over their child's future, but Lauren shifted their roles. She turned potential rivals into reluctant allies. Patrick remarried, moved forward. Tony settled into a friendship, co-parenting with ease. Michael left bitter, only to return. Through lawsuits and accusations, and through it all, Lauren maintained the image of balance, smiling, posing, ensuring that at public events, every father looked cooperative, every child looked cared for. But beneath that balance lies a truth rarely spoken. Children of blended billionaire families do not inherit freedom. They inherit expectation. Nico expected to rise beyond modeling into influence, perhaps politics, perhaps business. Evan expected to step into the world of aviation technology, finance, perhaps even spaceflight, where his stepfather builds rockets. Ella expected to maintain the quiet dignity of restraint until the moment comes when her presence alone will signal stability in a dynasty watched by the world. This is not paranoia. It is pattern. Look to other dynasties. The Murdochs, the Hiltons, the Kardashians. Every child's move calculated every public image, polished every career path, either rebellion or allegiance. Lauren studied this long before she walked into Bezos' orbit. She knew that the future was not about herself, but about the 3 children whose lives would either fracture under scrutiny or thrive under structure. And yet structure is not destiny. Identity slips through cracks no matter how tight. The walls already. Nico shows hints of wanting independence from the billionaire label. Evan shows hints of carving a name not tied solely to family scandal. Ella shows hints of a refusal to play the fame game at all. Each choice carries a weight their mother may not control. So the question remains when the cameras fade, when the headlines shift, when Bezos one day steps back from Amazon and Blue Origin, who holds the weight, who carries the dynasty forward? Will it be Nico in tailored suits? At power conferences, will it be Evan piloting not just aircraft, but corporations? Will it be Ella, the quiet one, stepping out only when the dynasty requires its most trusted face? Or will it be none of them? Will they break free from the carefully drawn map and carve out lives untouched by their mother's strategy? And this is the haunting beauty of the story, because it is unfinished. The wedding was not an ending, it was a prologue. a beginning of a dynasty that must weather betrayal, lawsuits, scrutiny, and above all, the unpredictability of human hearts. Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, cannot predict it. Lauren Sánchez, the woman who mastered control, cannot script it. The fathers who once played their roles cannot guide it. And the world that watches cannot decide it. What remains is the silence of the children, their futures hovering between obedience and rebellion, between opportunity and burden, between dynasty and freedom. And as the cameras flash and the headlines roar, we are left with the image of Lauren walking the aisle, her sons by her side, her daughter watching as maid of honor, and the quiet understanding that behind the glamour lies a family balancing on the thin line between strategy and fate. And maybe that is the final twist, that the greatest suspense in this Hollywood billionaire saga is not whether Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez survive scandal, but whether their children can survive inheritance, whether they can take the empire laid before them and still find the one thing money cannot script: their own identity. At the end of the day, Hollywood isn't just about glamour and red carpets. It's about power, secrets, and the scandals that often stay hidden until the truth forces its way into the spotlight. Whether it's courtroom drama, relationship, chaos, or behind-the-scenes deals, one thing is certain: the story never ends here. And as always, we'll be watching, digging, and uncovering the pieces others try to keep buried.